So last week I spoke to you guys about transcendence and how I brought it into the bank, how we can bring it in to experiences that you wouldn't expect in the mundane of our daily lives. The bank, anything that has a little heat, that gets a little, a little rough. The rough parts of our lives, those are the times, those are the opportunities to bring that in. I had another opportunity this week. We had a meeting earlier in the week, and it got heated, and there was a lot of disagreement, and we were able to stay in that. I was able to stay in that. Everybody in the meeting hung in there. It was uncomfortable. It was an uncomfortable meeting. But because we were able to hang in there, to be with each other, to love on each other, in the midst of all that, all of a sudden, Sue Edwards comes out with this brilliant idea. Something that had nothing to do, it rose above the disagreement, and we all just went, oh. And there was something new on the table. There was something new to help this center grow that had not been there before. But that's what's possible when we're willing to be there in what feels like chaos, what feels like uncomfortability. When we lean into that uncomfortability, we're willing to know that, of course, our lives work. Something's going to rise here, then it does. But when this is uncomfortable, I don't want to do this no more. I'm out of here. This isn't working. We miss those kinds of opportunities that are actually possible in our lives. And so Ash was asking me some pretty deep questions about, well, what really happened in that cabin in the woods? How did that all go about? Because I'd actually been in this teaching and been working and studying and taking these classes for almost a decade before I wound up in that cabin. And in that decade, I met a woman that I ultimately married. I became the music director at the CSL in Asheville. I wrote a ton of songs. A CD was released, and it went out to all these other centers that I started getting calls and asking me to come play there. And I'm working, and I'm in classes, and I'm watching my life just get better and better. Things are really hopping, and I was signed to major labels and playing in rock and roll bands. Well, that year, there was this one year when I was out on tour for this CD, I made more money than I had ever made in rock and roll all together. It was an incredible year, so much so that we wound up, I married a woman, and we built this, we bought 6 acres on top of a mountain with this extraordinary view, built a 3,000 square foot house up there with a bedroom that was 22 feet across by 15, and it was all glass. Right, with a deck, a glass door even that went out to a deck that just looked out over this gorgeousness. I had it made, and then it all fell apart. The whole thing. Lost the house, lost being music director, got divorced. I had no money. It was all gone. No place to live, and no job prospects. I had no idea how this could happen. I had been in this teaching for a decade. I was so deep in it. How did this happen that everything would just fall apart like that? And one day, I'm looking in the newspaper first thing in the morning like I was always doing, and I saw this ad for a free rent in exchange for fixing up the cabin in the woods. And I had some carpentry skills, so I called her up and went out and saw the lady whose cabin it was, and we made a deal right then in the spot, and I moved in that day. Free rent. What a miracle. How often does that happen? Now I'm in this cabin in the woods, but still feeling pretty sorry for myself. I got no money in the bank, no prospects. How am I going to eat? And then the phone rang. And it was these folks from this job I had applied to 4 months earlier who had told me that what I wanted, it was a computer programming job, and what I had wanted for it was they could get it way cheaper in India. And if I wasn't willing to drop my price, they were going to go with India. And I said, go with India, 4 months earlier. And they called me up and said, I guess we've decided to go with you after all. And it was enough money to cover my costs for a year living out in that cabin. And so I'm out in that cabin now, transforming myself, because it's very clear that what fell apart, how everything fell apart, wasn't about the circumstances, it was about me. It was about me. And I needed to find out what that was. What was it about me where I could be in this teaching and learn all this stuff and visualize and have my life transform the way it did into this great thing that then all fell apart? And that's when I realized that I had not yet reached the core of my nature, my being, my soul. That I had not yet learned to live by that which was fully true for me. And that my soul's intention was so strong, so powerful in me, that it wasn't going to let me continue down a road that wasn't the road that was mine to be on. And I didn't know that until I was in that cabin and it got real quiet, because I was out there with just me and my dog for 2 years. To get in touch that deeply. And then I recognized that from that place, I was building a foundation of knowing myself. That now, with using these teachings, it was coming out of that place. It was coming out of that place of depth in me. And that's what it takes to build a life that's awesome. You know, the miracles of the house showing up and the job showing up the way it did. Most people live a life of where, that just happens once in a blue moon. Where I've been learning that if you're really in touch here, you really know yourself that deeply, miracles are much more of an everyday occurrence, not just once in a blue moon. So I think that what we're dealing with here is, for starters, the fact that the practice is called the science of mind. I think that that's a problem in and of itself, and I'll tell you why after I'm watching this show, Vikings, on Netflix. I do not recommend it. It's very violent, but I happen to like that kind of stuff. But one of the things I really like about the show is how they talk about the gods. This takes place back in 750 AD. There wasn't a ton of science going on back then. Superstition really ran the show for the most part. And so people believed in fate and destiny and were very much drawn into, what did the gods have in store for them? And when I hear people today speak as if there is a God that uses them. There's Ricky Byers, who is very popular in our movement, has a song called Use Me. Who's doing that? Who's using you? Some God out here that we have become this open vessel for that guides us? I don't think so. I think that's still superstition. But our minds want to measure things. Our ego minds. And don't think for a second that there's any amount of logic, critical thinking. We're not critical enough. Our minds, let's be reasonable. Nothing creative ever came out of being reasonable. There's this great saying you hear over Facebook all the time. Well-behaved women never made history. Well-behaved anybody never made history. Because it takes not being reasonable. It takes going beyond that, but it's scary. It's scary to go beyond what people think is reasonable, and our minds want to wrap I hear people all the time going, I need to understand this. I need to wrap my head around it. Your head cannot wrap around the infinite. Your head cannot wrap around the powerful, creative, spiritual being you are. And yet, our teaching is even called science of mind, as if the mind can do it. When there's something beyond it, but it's not out there, it's here. It's right here. We have it. We are it. It's in us. And it feels so darn good to be in touch with that part of ourselves, to let ourselves shine. And so I'm in this cabin in the woods, and I'm starting to realize this. I'm starting to realize, oh my God, right, this is the place to live from. That if I live from my soul's intention. And then how do I do that? How do I get beyond my mind that really wants to wrap its head and understand everything? How do I get beyond that? And so I started developing these practices that really allowed me to start living from this place of beingness, of feelingness, in a whole new way that many times my mind said, what the heck are you doing? So I'm in this cabin in the woods, and I have a dream of a woman with short black hair, gorgeous face. And one day I'm on Facebook, and through my feed comes this woman. And it's that woman. And I'm like, oh my God, that's her. And we're married now. But at the time, she lived in LA. And I hate LA. I'd been there a little bit in the 70s, and I didn't want nothing to do with LA. And she says, well, I can't leave LA. This is where my kids are, and I have custody agreement. If you want to be with me, you got to come to LA. And my beingness, that my mind was like, no friggin' way. I hate it. It's in the city. I'm a country guy. I like being out in the woods. I was in Asheville at the time, right? If you know anything about Asheville, it's all mountains. I mean, it's green and gorgeous. It's considered, right outside, it's considered a rainforest. It's really quite something. LA's a desert with a lot of buildings and dust and ugh. And yet my being was like, you're moving to LA. I'm like, okay, if I'm really going to go by this, I'm moving to LA. So that's what I did. I moved to LA. And this is a big city with a lot of CSL spiritual leaders in it who are looking for work. And not a lot of as many centers as you might think. But this one center opens up, and once again I get this full thing, go, it's yours. And so I went there into the Burbank CSL. It was mine. And it didn't go well. It was hard. It was a lot of heavy lifting there. And my being said, this is your place of opportunity. This is your place to learn. This is your place to grow. The church didn't grow. The center didn't grow. 3.5 years, we didn't see any growth at all there. And so you may be in a part of your life where things are not going well, but you have this sense of beingness that this is yours to do anyway. The question is, do you struggle or do you learn? Because they're different. What we have here is an opportunity in every moment of our lives to learn. What it is we're bringing forth, this is the thing that I've so totally gotten clear on lately, is that every single one of us does have a destiny. But it isn't in what things look like out here. It's how things feel in here. It's our ability to become who we have come here to be and to allow how that's used out here to appear. That when we get in touch so deeply and continue to practice and continue to learn from the opportunities that life will constantly offer us, we get to grow from in here a way of being in the world that is miraculous. What I notice is that there's very little that feels mundane about my life these days. Very little. I mean, even when I'm watching a TV show, I'm feeling the miracle of what it's teaching me, what I'm getting out of it. I'm walking in the woods and I feel, around this area, just walking around this area, and I'm seeing things and I'm noticing things from an entirely different perspective than I would have just even a few years ago. What I learned in Burbank is I wasn't who I am now. But I had to become who I am now to be here with you now. If I was who I was in Burbank, we wouldn't have been a good fit. You didn't want that guy. You want this guy. But I had to grow to be this guy. I had to use the opportunity of what's there. And that's what you have in your life. If you do not have what you want in your life yet, if it has not come to fruition, and what you want is from the deepest part of your soul, it's simply that you have not become that yet. And that once you do, that will show up. It did for me. You are my fulfillment. People say, I hear young people say all the time that what drives me is being unsatisfied. And I'm here to tell you that I am driven by my satisfaction, not by my unsatisfaction. And it is a much more satisfying way to live, to feel satisfied. Would you agree that it's a much more satisfying way to live, to feel satisfied? Well, that's what's possible here. At any age, when what we're looking at is not what's going on out there, but what's going on in here in reaction to what's going on out here. What's going on out here is for our benefit, for our growth. It is our opportunity. And the deeper we get into that place of knowing that from here, the more we get to experience that way, the more I've gotten to experience it that way. It's wondrous what's possible. But if we get caught up in our mind's rationale, in our logic, in thinking that science is God, by trying to prove that this stuff somehow works because it's not measurable. We love stuff that's measurable. It makes it easy. We can measure it. It's easy. This is simple now. This is not measurable, and yet it's quantifiable. The results I have in my life, the results of us being together like this, is absolutely quantifiable, that we come together like this. This is amazing that we found each other. It's miraculous that we get to have this experience with each other, that we get to be inspired by each other. This is what's possible. This is what my life has been. I'm blown away by the continuation of my own personal growth. I had this great conversation yesterday where I got to see, oh, here's my next step. I love conversations like that because I want this to keep going. And the way it does is you keep expanding. You keep expanding who you are. Your life will expand as long as you do. Your life will contract as soon as you start contracting. I just finished watching the documentary on the dynasty of the New England Patriots. I think I spoke about that a little last week. And one of the things they talked about is after winning 3 Super Bowls, it became a drug, and they fell into a complete area of fear around not winning it again. That they were overcome, where what they had done for starters is expand and expand and expand, and then they got into this place where they started to shrink, and sure enough, the results went along with it. That it wasn't until they recognized that they got beyond that they could see how they could expand again, that things took off again. But this is how it works. It works for all of us. If your life is shrinking, look here, not out here. Otherwise, you're just scrambling to fix something that isn't in line with who you are anyway, or who you have come here to be, who you could grow into. When things are shrinking, look here to expand. I am constantly looking for my edge, my growing edge. Because that's how I keep expanding. And knowing that as long as I'm looking at my growing edge, my life will keep feeling and growing the way it does. Is it uncomfortable at times? Heck yeah. My life gets real uncomfortable at times. But I love it. I just love it. Open to the possibility that any time you are uncomfortable, breathe, relax into it. Look, this is my growing edge. This is how I expand. And if I expand, that's how your dreams unfold. Unfold. I haven't had to chase anything. In fact, I find my dreams are now chasing me as I unfold me. This is the kind of stuff I'll be talking about in the class. This is the kind of stuff that sparks me, that I'm passionate about. Do you get that I'm passionate about this? I love this stuff. I want you to be passionate about it. I want you to know what it feels like to have a life that feels so darn good all the time. Even when it's uncomfortable, it's like, oh, it's uncomfortable now. Isn't that great? Imagine feeling like that. Oh, it's uncomfortable. Isn't that great? Instead of being, oh, I got to get out of here. This is what's possible for each and every one of us. Let's grow together. Let's do this together, man. This is an incredible way to live, and I promise you that the more of us that live this way will have a bigger impact on the world than anyone who's upset about the world. This is how real change happens. This is how real change happens. Thank you. I love you.